So on this week's episode, we're talking about the cost of dirt. Let's get to it. So what are the costs that actually entail being able to go vertical? And that's what we're talking today. It breaks into three main categories. The cost of utilities, whether you're actually bringing new utilities to your site or whether you have existing utilities like we have on this infill new custom home that we'll be building here in a few short weeks. The second is going to be the cost of demo and removing any vegetation that's necessary within the lot. And the third is going to be the associated cost of building that dirt pad that's going to be your first step to being able to have a fantastic foundation for your home to reside on. So when it comes to utility services, there's two absolute necessities, which are going to be water and electricity. And then the third is going to be gas, which is going to be a luxury, but also what most people want for their range and some of the other components and appliances throughout the home. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is our gas disconnect. Our gas disconnect in this case is right in the back, and the cost associated for that is about $200 to be able to disconnect those services, but then another couple $1,000s to be able to get your conduit in place and run your new gas line to the house. The second item is going to be your electricity. Now what's interesting on electricity is electricity used to cost us almost $0 to be able to reconnect to an existing lot. However, with the additional strain that's required by the standard becoming 400 amp panels, electric charging units, and some people wanting to get away from gas, the reality is that the utility companies are typically charging us an upgrade cost when it comes to our transformers that will have to be replaced to be able to meet the new capacity. So now we've talked about the disconnection of the gas, the disconnection and reconnection of the electrical. The last one we have is water. And although the water tap exists, typically the new water requirements are going to be a 3/4 inch line if it doesn't have fire sprinklers, or a 1 inch line if it does. And throughout the neighborhood when this subdevelopment was built, as well as most of them in Phoenix, it was about a 5/8 inch line. So therefore we're going to have a water meter upgrade charge as well. This is where it starts to get a little complicated when it comes to pricing. In this case, our electrical is going to be overhead, reconnected to the house, and our gas is going to come from the back utility alley. But in this case, our water main sits here in the front. Now, depending on how the subdivision was created, ultimately your utilities can reside in the rear or in the front of the property. However, if any of these utilities reside in the street in front of your house and it requires more than a 2 square foot cut, they'll require you to do what is called a slurry and seal 25 feet in each direction, which you can see here from a previous house that was developed next door. And the slurry and seal allows them to be able to refinish this area of the street after they've taken care of any of the upgraded utilities that come to the property. In short, when you see a lot of redevelopment in your neighborhood, a lot of municipalities are going to start putting policies in place that make sure that they're not incurring additional unnecessary costs due to the development within those neighborhoods. And to provide a much cleaner contrast of what this slurry and seal does is essentially you're taking care of a new asphalt patch that allows them to be able to compact appropriately and then be able to reseal so that erosion and any potholes throughout the neighborhood won't occur, and that it's correctly addressed for the future homeowner and future neighborhood use. So now let's get down to the cost. The first item I'm going to cover is the water meter. This is typically issued with your permit, and the water meter upgrade is going to be about $1,000, give or take, depending on if it's a 3/4 or a 1 inch line. The second item is going to be your gas, which includes a $200 fee from the utility company to disconnect, another $1,000 or so to be able to get your conduit to your new location where your meter is going to be. And here's the secret here in the city of Phoenix is that as long as you have 4 gas appliances, they're not going to charge you per appliance to be able to reinstall. So that's why we always try to include 4 gas drops with our home. Overall, the cost ranges between $1,000 and $2,000. Then when we get to our electrical, I mentioned that because of the additional strain on the grid, oftentimes we're having to replace or upgrade a transformer, and that cost is going to be somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 if we're going overhead, and it could be substantially more if we decide to go underground, dependent on where we're tapping into the grid. So overall, $6,000 to $9,000 to be able to reestablish utilities for new construction really isn't that much in comparison to the overall scope of work included in a new construction home. However, as I mentioned, where it gets tricky is that slurry and seal requirement. And with that slurry and seal, usually it's going to run somewhere between $7,500 and $10,000 to be able to have the appropriate asphalt company come out and take care of this piece, and to ensure that that cost is taken care of by either the contractor and or the homeowner that's going to be building that home. They have you put a bond in place to ensure that that's paid up front and will not release that bond until the work's complete. So all in all, our total cost for utilities is going to be somewhere between $6,000 and $18,000, really, with the wild card being that street repair. So with that said, let's move on to the second bucket when it comes to cost of dirt. So I'm going to cheat a little bit here. Our demo costs are roughly $25,000 to $35,000. And here are the four main things that encapsulate that cost. The first is going to be our permits. Yes, we have to pull demo permits, which are about $75 per structure. So not a huge cost there. One structure, $75. If you have three structures, let's say a small shed, a pool, and a house, you're going to be at $225. In addition to that, our demo company typically pulls our dust permits that are required here in the state of Arizona to make sure that we are able to keep that dust to a minimum within the neighborhood. And that's usually included in their bid, but roughly is about $500, $600 for a dust permit from the county of Maricopa. The third cost bucket is going to be the preparation to make sure that we don't have track out, and that track out rock is going to be located over here at the entrance of the property, typically where the previous driveway resided. It allows us the ability to be able to clean off our vehicles before they enter into the street and track mud and dirt down the road. And our third and fourth items are going to be the demoing of the actual structures, as well as removing any necessary vegetation off the lot. And this finally gets us to a point where we're back to the basic dirt that's resided on this lot for the last 70 or 80 years. So for final clarification on this point, we're talking $25,000 to $35,000, and that's really going to be dependent on the overall size of the structure in which we're demoing that creates the variance of that $10,000. Now, in some areas, this could be less or more, but for our standard projects that are typically somewhere between a quarter acre and a half acre, that's what we're seeing. So at the current moment, that sits our price tag at somewhere between 30 and 50K to get to dirt. But as mentioned, there's three buckets that allow us to be able to get to construction and go vertical. And this is the most critical component for the house structure, as it's the first item that must be taken care of before building. And that is the excavation, compaction, and certification of your dirt pad. In this portion of the project, it's going to divide into three costs, which is going to be our soils report, which is going to be a geotechnical engineer, and that report's going to typically run between $2,000 and $3,000. They're going to come out, they're going to test the soil, and then they're going to ensure that we do what's appropriate to be able to ensure that we have a clean fill and that we have the appropriate depth and height associated for the new home and building structure. The second item is going to be the excavation, typically what we call an over-X. So over-Xing the pad larger than what footprint of the house, and then recompacting it to the appropriate height associated with the G&D for our final grade. The last and final component is usually the anomaly in the equation, which is going to be anything that's found during that over-Xing, which is the whole purpose of over-Xing in the first place, which is going to be our septic or our cesspits or any voids that are found, or any other potential structures that might be existing underneath the existing lot, that might be existing either underneath the existing foundation or within the overall footprint of the new home. Overall, the cost of finding a septic or a cesspit, which is pretty normal when you're doing redevelopment on homes that were built in the 50s, is going to range between $1,500 and $3,000. And the overall scope is going to include the removal of the structure, the pad certification to have the soils engineer come out and make sure that we either fill the cesspit or septic system with the appropriate fill, whether that be a slurry fill or whether that be a rock fill, and then the associated materials necessary to make sure that that is filled, compacted, and ready for the new home to be able to reside over the top of it. So overall, in these infill development lots, we're looking at somewhere between $25,000 and $35,000 for the overall dirt work and the associated pieces that ensure that it's done correctly. So to add all these numbers up, we're talking somewhere between $6,000 to $18,000 for utilities, $25,000 to $35,000 for demo and getting everything ready to the point that we're sitting right here at dirt, and another $20,000 to $35,000 to be able to get to a final grade, which brings our total to somewhere between $61,000 and $88,000 to be able to get to a point where you can actually go vertical. And this is what we call our lot prep bucket at Rebuild the Block. Ultimately, I feel like this step is one of the things that's often overlooked by our homeowners and those that are looking to build a new construction home. You got to remember that you have an acquisition of that land or that lot. Then you have the lot prep cost as well as all the design costs before you ever start building a vertical structure. And that's why it's important to work with a GC that understands development to be able to ensure that you have all of those cost buckets accounted for right from the start of your project. So overall, if you like more videos like this and the content that revolves around the cost of construction, please DM us below, click that subscribe link, and as always, have a great day.